Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Hello. Good morning, Beth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Knox. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the executive director of the Equality Fund here at the Boston Foundation. I am exceptionally grateful for all of you who are joining us in person as well as online for this important conversation and topic this morning. As we get started, I want to recognize we have a few public and elected officials who are joining us. I've seen Representatives Jack Lewis and John Moran. Thank you both for joining us. I think Sam Montano may be here. If not, they'll be joining us shortly. These three representatives are all part of the LGBTQ Legislative Caucus up at the State House, representing our community inside the district and outside. Thank you all for joining us. We also have Raina Hill with the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth. In the audience, I believe, is City of Boston Chief of Equity and Inclusion, Mariangeli Solis-Savera. I know Kimberly Roden from the Mayor's Office of LGBTQIA Advancement. Welcome, Kimberly. And I also want to recognize TBF trustee Elise Cherry and former co-chair of the Equality Fund Advisory Board. Good morning, everyone. So the Equality Fund was founded over 12 years ago as a field of interest fund to advance LGBTQ equity in Greater Boston. To date, we are the largest dedicated funder in Massachusetts to the LGBTQ community, and we are guided by an advisory board of community members who hold us in proximity to ensure that our work is prioritizing the LGBTQIA community. And I saw advisory committee member Theo Tyson joining us. The fund is committed to investing in research, public forums, and convening strategic partnerships and grant making to the nonprofit organizations that are serving our diverse LGBTQ community in Greater Boston. To date, the Equality Fund has awarded over $2.3 million to 104 LGBTQ serving organizations across Greater Boston. One of the ways the Equality Fund and the Boston Foundation at large works to move equity is through community-based research. We do this as a call to action for other funders and policymakers and to support our nonprofit ecosystem and the work they do every day. Tools that help amplify both the visible and invisible needs as well as the strengths of the LGBTQ community are especially critical given that our community has been under attack for almost 4 months. And for years, less than 25 cents on every $100 in charitable giving goes to support LGBTQ community and issues. We need partners to invest in our community and join the Equality Fund, ensuring LGBTQ equity, protecting the rights that have been fought for and won, as well as to help address the systemic issues and the new issues that continue to face our community. Since January, the current administration has worked to radically restructure public health funding, healthcare access, critical research, and limit the rights of the most vulnerable members of our community. The report being released today informed the Equality Fund 2025 funding priorities, all of which have been exacerbated and amplified over the last 3+ months of executive orders. In good news, in June, the Equality Fund will announce our largest docket of grant making to date. Combined with $450,000 from the Safety Net Grants program, bringing over $1 million in grant funding to the most urgent needs in the LGBTQ community. Thank you. We're able to do this thanks to our nonprofit sector, our public leaders, our donors, and allies who help ensure Greater Boston remains a proof point of what a collaborative journey towards queer and trans liberation looks like. Today's research is a follow-up to the groundbreaking 2018 report, Equality and Equity, led by Sean Cahill and the Boston Indicators team. We are exceptionally grateful to Eastern Bank Foundation, a longtime champion for the LGBTQ community who helped sponsor the 2025 update, along with collaborating funders United Way of Mass Bay and the Bruce J. Anderson Foundation. This morning, we'll hear a summary of the research findings from Sean Cahill, Director of Health Policy Research at the Fenway Institute. Thank you, Sean, for your partnership and deep commitment to the LGBTQ community. And then following Sean's presentation, we will invite an esteemed panel of community members and leaders to join us in discussion of the findings, and then we'll open up for some public Q&A before we wrap. Before we jump in with Sean's presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Jordina Shanks, CEO of Fenway Health, which includes the Fenway Institute. Jen, I got a few things. So, a native of Greater Boston, Jordina is a longtime leader in community health, including Mattapan Community Health and Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts. Jordina will share a bit about Fenway, but inviting you to the podium, I want to recognize the right leader at the right time. Jordina, you are tactical in strategy, and you prioritize people who work with you in serving Fenway's patients every day. Thank you, Jordina.
Thank you, Scott, for that warm introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all for joining us for the release of this important report for the LGBTQIA+ community in Massachusetts. I'm Jordina Shanks, the CEO of Fenway Health, a community health center serving over 32,000 patients each year, and founded on the principle that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. We are the largest non-hospital-based healthcare provider of LGBTQIA+ and HIV care in New England. The Fenway Institute is our nationally renowned interdisciplinary center for research, education, training, and policy development. And our public health prevention programs include a sexual health clinic and harm reduction services for people who inject drugs. Today, Fenway Health is navigating one of the most difficult periods in healthcare in a generation. But I want you to know that we are doing so from a place of progress and strength. Although we're facing unprecedented political and financial headwinds, we've dug ourselves out of a deep financial hole, and for the first time in 4 years, we are operating at a surplus, we are welcoming new patients, we are investing in our people, and we are protecting our mission. But I have to be honest. It is difficult to be a queer woman of color leading an LGBTQIA+ organization at this time in our country. Since January 20th, we've seen millions of dollars slashed from LGBTQIA+ research, HIV prevention, and public health efforts. A rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, illegal deportations, and an unconscionable attempt to erase trans and gender diverse people. The attacks on our people and those we serve are not an anomaly or a sudden political shift. They are part of a long and painful pattern, one that runs deep through our country's history. We are a nation built on controlling bodies through slavery, through forced sterilization, through denying bodily autonomy to women, to immigrants, to disabled people, and now trans people and the families who love them. These are not isolated acts of hatred. They are calculated efforts to reinforce systems of power. At Fenway Health, we firmly believe every person is entitled to the same rights, resources, access to power, and the opportunities to live the life of their choosing with respect. For more than 50 years now, this is what Fenway Health has been fighting for every day. Since its inception just over 20 years ago, the Fenway Institute, through research, policy, and education, has played a critical role in improving the health and well-being of sexual and gender minorities and individuals affected by HIV. And it starts with data. In the words of the late co-founder of the Fenway Institute, Judy Bradford, if you are not counted, you don't count. Sexual orientation and gender identity data reporting and analysis helps to improve healthcare access, quality, and outcomes for the LGBTQIA+ community. Today, I am proud to celebrate the collaboration between Fenway Health and the Boston Foundation in producing the vital information contained within this report for our community. This report acknowledges our advancements and puts a spotlight on where there is a need for continued advocacy, progress, and vigilance to improve the health and well-being of our LGBTQIA+ friends, families, and neighbors. I'd like to thank the Boston Foundation for their partnership on this historic initiative, and Eastern Bank Foundation for their financial support for this project. Strong local philanthropic, research, and advocacy efforts like this will be vital as we continue to resist anti-LGBTQIA+ actions and work together to create a society in which all LGBTQIA+ in the Commonwealth can thrive. Thank you. And now it is my honor and privilege to introduce a leader whose work has profoundly shaped the landscape of LGBTQIA+ health policy and advocacy across the country. He is the Director of Health Policy Research at the Fenway Institute and co-author of the LGBTQ+ People in Massachusetts. With a career spanning decades, Sean Cahill has become one of the nation's foremost voices in advancing equitable healthcare for LGBTQIA+ communities, people living with HIV, and older adults navigating complex health systems. Please join me in extending a warm welcome and lots of gratitude to Sean Cahill.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It's great to see a full room here, and welcome to those of you joining us online. So I am going to give an overview of the findings of our report, LGBT People in Massachusetts, Strengths, Challenges, and Opportunities in a Diverse Community. Let's see. Okay. Technical difficulties. Point it there. Hey, Gary. Okay. Okay. Here we go. All righty. Thanks for your patience. So, my presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about the research questions that we had going into this project, our methodology, our key findings, which are that we are a large and growing community. We face challenges and inequities in healthcare. We experience discrimination and random violence, particularly transgender people. People experience social isolation, food and housing insecurity and poverty. And we also heard a lot about resilience and community strength. And then I'm going to finish with recommendations. And if you don't mind, the person standing in the back right in front of me, would you mind just moving so I could see the slides? I'm actually using that screen. A little more. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, so the key research questions were, how large is the sexual and gender minority community in Massachusetts? Where do we see geographic concentrations? What age cohort differences do we see in the population? Is the racial and ethnic diversity within the sexual and gender minority population similar to that of the general population of Massachusetts? And what are the growth trends within the SGM community? What's the overall experience of people living in Massachusetts? What are the most important issues or needs facing them? What should the government or private funders be funding within the SGM community that is currently not receiving sufficient funding or attention? And are there specific things that are going well within the local, state, or national communities for sexual and gender minority people or LGBTQ plus people? Okay, so our methodology, we use 3 population-based surveys: the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the Massachusetts Youth Health Survey, and the Behavioral Risk Factors Surveillance System Survey. These are 3 surveys funded by the CDC, which are conducted by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Each of them, the youth surveys ask people if they're LGBT or questioning of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And the Behavioral Risk Factors Survey asks people if they're LGB, another sexual orientation, or transgender. So we're going to use the terms LGBT or questioning youth and LGBT plus adults, okay? And in addition to the population-based survey data, we conducted listening sessions both in person and online with diverse community members and leaders from 3 populations across the Commonwealth: SGM older adults, SGM Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and transgender and gender diverse individuals. We then did in-person listening sessions with SGM and questioning youth at a youth services program in a small city in eastern Massachusetts. And then I serve on the Massachusetts LGBT Aging Commission, and so we had 4 listening sessions around the time we were researching this report. So I took copious notes and let the listening session participants know that we might quote them in a report with no identifying data information. And those were held in New Bedford, Worcester, Boston, and online. So we had people from around the Commonwealth join us online. Okay, so the key findings. We are a large and growing community. 9.1% of adults in Massachusetts were LGBT, according to the 2020 to 2022 BRFSS data. This is up 26% from the report we put out 7 years ago. That was based on 2016 BRFSS data. And 7 years ago, we found that 7.2% of the population was LGBT or another sexual orientation. This translates to roughly 514,000 LGBT plus adults in Massachusetts. We also cite data from other reports. So this is from a report that the Williams Institute and our colleague Kareth Conran co-authored. And this was looking at data from all 50 states. And this report shows that Massachusetts is one of the most heavily LGBT states in the country. There are actually 8 states with a higher percentage of LGBT per capita than Massachusetts, but we're up there. And we also cited some data from the US Census Bureau on same-sex couple households. So this is a map showing density of female married and unmarried couple households, female same-sex couple households. And as you can see, New England, most of New England, and certainly Massachusetts, has some of the greatest densities of female same-sex couple households. We saw the same thing with male couple households. One thing that was interesting was younger age cohorts were more likely to be LGBTQ or questioning. So 23% of high school students and 23% of young adults, 18 to 24, said that they were LGBT or were questioning of their identity. And this is consistent with what we see in the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. This graphic here, these are data from the Centers for Disease Control, and this is multi-state, multi-city youth risk behavior survey data. And as you can see, about 24% in 2021 identified as sexual minority. This actually didn't include gender minority. This is just sexual minority data. So this is a graphic showing age cohort differences among adults in Massachusetts. So you can see young adults, 23% LGBT plus, but people in my age cohort, 5.5% LGBT plus. So this is something we've seen over time, but all of these bars have increased over the last 7 years. Oops. Okay. And we also found that the LGBT plus community is roughly the same in terms of racial ethnic diversity as the Massachusetts population. In terms of sex distribution, more female respondents reported identifying as LGBT plus than male respondents. This was true for adults and for youth. According to CDC national data or multi-state, multi-city data, about 2/3 of high school students who identify as transgender or questioning their gender identity, their sex assigned at birth was female. We found really interesting findings in terms of geographic distribution. So Suffolk County has one of the highest per capita densities of LGBT people. About 10% of adults in Suffolk County are LGBT. But in the Pioneer Valley, that's where we saw the highest percentages. So the 3 counties in the Pioneer Valley were between 11 and 14% LGBT. And we also saw concentrations in Bristol and in Barnstable County. This is a map from the City of Boston Planning Department, just showing per capita density of same-sex couple households. This is a subset of the LGBT population, probably about 10% of our total population. And then we also reproduced some maps with permission from the from the City of Boston Planning Department, showing densities in Boston. The highest densities were in the South End and Jamaica Plain, and Mission Hill also had a significant density of LGBT people. Okay, so now health indicators. We found disparities in general health, overall health, chronic disease burden, behavioral health burden, risk factors, and healthcare access. Okay, so LGBT adults were 1.6 times more likely to report that their overall health was fair or poor. They were 1.8 times more likely to say that they had not been able to see a doctor in the past year due to concerns about cost. They were young adults, here it's relatively speaking, 18 to 49-year-olds were nearly twice as likely to report ever having been diagnosed with COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And in our transgender listening session, one of the participants said, the state already could not handle the trans community that's already here in Massachusetts in terms of healthcare, gender-affirming healthcare. And now we have lots of people coming to Massachusetts from other states, and it's putting more burden on the healthcare system. LGBT plus adults were 1.3 times more likely, or about 30% more likely, than straight cisgender adults to currently smoke cigarettes and to drink heavily in the previous month. They were 2.3 times more likely to report ever being told they had a depressive disorder, and they were 3.8 times more likely to report seriously considering suicide in the previous year. These disparities in behavioral health were even more striking among young people. And so DPH puts out this new survey, the Mass Youth Health Survey, and they found that LGBT and questioning youth were 3 times more likely to report self-injury, almost 40% of youth, and to seriously consider suicide, 30% of youth, compared to the straight cisgender peers. And more than 65% of students identifying as lesbian, gay, and bisexual reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in the past year. So why is this? Why are we seeing these behavioral health disparities? A lot of it has to do with violence victimization and bullying. Young people, and we did 2 focus groups with young people, and we found that a lot of them reported feeling disconnected from their peers due to a lack of understanding or acceptance. Many young people talked about coming out in elementary school, and they said that when they did this, they experienced a shift away from acceptance from their age peers, but also from adults. So one person said, I started getting slightly bullied, and people would avoid me because I was different. Another young person said, it was also really difficult. When I came out, I was 11, and I was the only trans person at my school. And there was only one other trans person that graduated out of the middle school. So people didn't really know what that meant. So people didn't really respect me or understand me. We also found, this was from 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey data, that young people who are LGBT or questioning had about 3 times the rate of experiencing sexual violence than their straight peers. We also heard from adults and young people challenging experiences in healthcare. One BIPOC listening session participant said, I had really bad experiences to the point where I stopped going to the doctor for years because I was so traumatized. So finding someone who understands both my racial and LGBTQ identities, I really struggle with. A young person said, where my insurance is based, it has gender-affirming healthcare bans. So my insurance does not cover any of my gender clinic appointments, any procedures that need to be done. It doesn't cover anything. My parents have to pay out of pocket. And then an older adult listening session participant said, I've experienced discrimination from healthcare professionals or providers who make assumptions about my lifestyle because I'm part of the LGBTQ community. We also heard about experiences of discrimination and random violence. One veteran living in the Worcester area said, I live in a 55+ community. I've had remarks made toward me and remarks made to the building manager about me. It's difficult because I live alone. I just turned 80. I have no one to really share with or have confidence in besides the building manager. My mood is very down because of it. And then an older transgender woman at the Boston listening session for the LGBTQ Aging Commission said, I know plenty of trans people who have been attacked. People walk up to them on the street, attack them, and run away. We also heard about social isolation, and that social isolation becomes a greater problem the further you get from Boston. So the first quote here is from a participant in the older adult listening session. This was a Boston resident, and she said that she didn't actually access LGBT affirming elder services, but the fact that they existed and she knew they existed helped reduce her sense of isolation. So she said, I don't feel that sense of isolation because I know that these places are here and I'm grateful that they're here. But another older adult in the online session who lives in rural central Massachusetts said that their entire experience as a sexual and gender minority individual living in a rural part of the state was lonely. Like I said, we cited data from other reports, and we found that the Greater Boston Food Bank reported in its most recent report that 56% of LGBTQ households experienced food insecurity in 2023 compared to 34% of all households. We also found that LGBT plus adults were more likely to earn under $25,000 a year, this is household income, and less likely to earn over $100,000 a year in terms of household income. We also found lower rates of home ownership among LGBT plus adults, and that LGBT plus adults were more likely to rent than own their homes. LGBT plus adults said that they were 48% more likely to report having difficulty paying their mortgage, rent, or utility bills than straight cisgender adults. Okay, so the surveys that I cited, they're youth risk behavior surveys, behavioral risk factor. So they focus on risk, and they focus on like not wearing a seatbelt and smoking and all these things that can kind of be negative. So we also wanted to find out from the listening sessions, what do people think is going well in Massachusetts? What are some of the strengths that we have as a community? What's great about living here as LGBTQ plus people? And we found that people thought we had supportive laws and policies and programming for LGBT people. For example, the Parentage Act, which was passed last year, thanks to the leadership of GLAAD in particular, GLBTQ advocates and defenders. Also the passage of the long-term care LGBTQI plus Bill of Rights. We have a first in the nation lesbian governor, and we have 2 women leading the Commonwealth. That's evidence of strength and sort of resilience of our state. We have a supportive congressional delegation, and for the most part, state and local governments are very supportive of LGBT people. That's not always true. There's a lot of stuff happening in rural areas that's not supportive, but for the most part, people talked about the fact that many BIPOC leaders, many of the leaders of LGBTQ organizations are BIPOC people. And that Boston Pride for the People is majority BIPOC with mostly black leaders. And then people talked about things like the Pride, the LGBT affirming senior housing in Hyde Park for LGBT elders and their friends as evidence of strength. And so here you see the governor getting sworn in by Senator Spilka, who's also a woman, leader of our Senate president. So I'm going to end with recommendations and then thank you. So among the recommendations we make are that we expand affirming healthcare, including in underserved areas, with a focus on mental health. That public health officials should partner with health professionals and community-based organizations to target and reduce chronic disease and behavioral health disparities, including the ones that I mentioned, tobacco and alcohol use, depression, and suicidality in particular. We call for more affordable SGM-friendly housing and reinforcement of non-discrimination measures in housing and employment. We call for the funding of programming to combat social isolation, both physical and digital spaces where people can go to gather and create community, and this is especially important in rural Massachusetts. We talk about the importance of ensuring that schools are safe for young people and that communities are safe for people across the age spectrum. And then we encourage the expanded collection of SOGI data to inform health programs and policies, and strengthening intersectional approaches to advance health equity by acknowledging and addressing the complex interplay of multiple marginalized identities within our communities. So my thank yous, I want to thank Maria McKenna in particular from Mass DPH, who did the data analysis of BRFSS for us, also Barry Callis, who helped facilitate that, and Commissioner Robbie Goldstein. My co-authors, Whitney Crebace and Scott Knox, Sandy Kendall, our editor, those who reviewed this, Adriana Boulin and Luke Schuster, those who participated in in-person and online listening sessions. I want to thank the Equality Fund for your generous support, and then my colleagues at Fenway Health who helped with this report. They're listed there: Jordina, Dallas, Adriana, Chris, Dana, Luciano, Ken, Lisa, and Lisa. And thank you. So. I'm under by 30 seconds. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Sean, for that impressive tour de force through the summary findings. Can we have another round of applause for Sean? So I'm going to switch my... We're good. Okay. I want to invite our panelists to the stage. So Mary, Paul, Chastity, Cecil, once again, Sean, if you join us on stage. So while folks are getting seated, Mary Bonato, Senior Director of Civil Rights and Legal Strategies at GLAD Law, among many wins for the LGBTQ+ community. In 2015, Mary successfully argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in the historic Obergefell case versus Hodges, which established the freedom to marry for same-sex couples nationwide. Mary, thank you for joining us. Paul Glass. Paul's a longtime organizer and leading supporter for LGBTQ communities of colors in Massachusetts, and is the founder of LGBTQ Elders of Color, working to decrease social isolation and ensure health equity for BIPOC LGBTQ aging adults. Welcome, Paul. Chastity Bowick, CEO of Chastity's Consulting and Talent Group, award-winning activist, civil rights leader, and transgender health advocate. Wait, there's more. I know. Everyone's getting abbreviated, those more, but I do have to lift up that Chastity led the Trans Emergency Fund of Massachusetts for 7 years. Which is the leading crisis agency for the transgender communities in Massachusetts. Welcome, Chastity. And then as we move down our panel, Cecil Santucci is a youth leader and youth steering committee member with the Salem-based NAGLI, and is a recent transplant to Massachusetts. Welcome, Cecil. And once again, Sean Cahill, Director of Health Policy Research at the Fenway Institute. Okay. So, Mary. A lot has happened in the last 4 months. And before we jump into a discussion of this report, we need to anchor the conversation in today. How do we put this moment in context in the fight for LGBTQ rights?
Few things. One is I want to just zoom out for a moment. I saw an interview by Hassan Minhaj of President Obama in 2023, and it made a real impression on me, and I want to share something about it briefly. Because Hassan, as the interviewer, was saying, aren't you depressed? In 2023, and there's a lot of reason to be depressed in 2023. Aren't you depressed? Look at what's not happening and what could have happened and so on. And President Obama said, I think if you step back, what you see is the trajectory over time is slow acceptance of people. It's slow, but it's happening. It continues to happen. And there was pushback on that. Hassan was not taking this and said, no, look at et cetera, et cetera. And the president said, well, ask your grandparents if things are better for them. Mm-hmm. And it made me think also about my grandparents and my parents and, et cetera. I'm sure we could all do this exercise about are things better. And if you will just pardon like an incredibly, you should cut me off, okay? Whatever. An incredibly selective and idiosyncratic, like short partial history. Okay, so let's just think about, to me, like an iconic and like incredible struggle around this country crawling and fighting and triumphing over Jim Crow. 100 years, over 100 years. And of course, the legacy of it exists today. But to think about that, and he had government-sponsored discrimination imitated by the private sector and in people's social lives, like really horrible. And you also saw, again, the organizing of people seen and unseen who made contributions large and small to move our nation forward in many ways, including with landmark civil rights legislation, which again still exists. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and those things set a platform and a framework for further development of civil rights under law in our nation, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, Rehab Act, Title IX of the Civil Rights Act as well. So anyway, I just want to say that that was real, and that is a triumph, and that is something that I think it has never been accomplished in many nations. So there's that. And I also just want to say, just zeroing in on the LGBTQ movement for a minute, sex laws. When I was born, every state had a sodomy law. When I was born, 1961, police harassment, pervasive. Hollywood and Broadway both had censorship codes. We're not going to show those people. We're not going to allow those storylines. So again, these are all themes, I think, that we see in the current administration as well. We're not going to talk about these people. We're going to pretend they don't exist. We're going to try to cut back on civil rights protections. We're going to harass people and so on. But I want to say that out of these struggles came a lot of good things. So for example, GLAAD law, where I work. GLAAD was founded because of harassment at the Boston Public Library of gay men who were there to gather, and not okay. And of course, there's a whole history of disrupting gatherings at bars and so on. So I want to put that out there. And the other thing I want to just point out is in the 1950s, in the Joe McCarthy era, Red Scare, an executive order from the president, and that's a big thing now, right? Executive orders, basically saying sex perverts cannot get security clearances and could not work for the federal government, which led to up to 10,000 people being fired as suspected persons of this nature. 10,000 people being fired. And there was a requirement that federal contractors do the same thing, which led to many more thousands of people being fired. And then state and local governments got in on it, which led to more people being fired. So I just want to say, out of that, we get these this is another contributor to civil rights. We have fought for these things, and we had people like Franklin Camedy, this guy who was in the map service, who got fired in 1957, and he was like, no way, I did nothing wrong. I am a human being, and he fought back, and I will just say, long trajectory to say, arguing that we shouldn't get fired because of who you are. And these themes have been with us. Now, of course, then there's the truly amazing resistance of Stonewall, which blew the doors open, right? And just basically, as we all know, led by particularly trans women of color. You were there, so I'm not going to say too much, okay? I'll let you talk about that. But like, talk about putting yourself on the map and saying, we are here, and we are here to stay. And I feel like our communities have done, I think an incredibly creative job of finding ways to fight forward. That even when we're overwhelmed, as we certainly have been in the AIDS crisis, where the government indifference was, close, unforgivable, okay? The indifference that we have faced, the hostility that we have faced, we have always found ways to fight forward. And that's the kind of thing that gives me enormous hope as we face this current unprecedented attack on trans people, on immigrants, and some other marginalized communities. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Mary. Yes. Paul, I want to go. At first, I want to recognize that Mary came in from Portland on a 5:15 a.m. bus, and Paul and Charles fought the way up from Cape Cod this morning. So thank you both for being here. Paul, as a longtime organizer, would just love your perspective and insight on this moment right now.
Well, longtime organizer, I would say my full-time organizing and advocacy began when I returned back to Massachusetts, where having lived in New York for almost 30 years. I would say, I'm kind of roll back in time for a minute. I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement, and it was before Stonewall, and there were lots of things that we were fighting for, and we were faced with discrimination on a regular basis, and the kind of life we had to live as LGBTQ people in secret. And it was a difficult time, and we were marginalized to the nth degree, and I can tell you, it was a life that was better to be invisible and not be seen, and certainly not be publicize your sexual preference for a variety of reasons. One, because of the laws were on the books and they were real and they were being enforced, and to the point where it was difficult to meet people, to find love, and we were oftentimes, LGBTQ folks were finding love in all the wrong places, and they were being exposed as a result of it, in public parks and public bathrooms. And when they were being raided and harassed and literally pulled out in public and with raids, and the press was called so that they could be publicized and put in the public newspapers about who they were, and it affected everything about their life, their jobs, their housing, all of that stuff. So I remember those things very well and how vivid it was having lived through that. We have made great strides, and you have mentioned it just a minute ago in terms of the kinds of laws that have been passed, civil rights laws, LGBTQ laws that have been profoundly have impacted how we live and how we engage with one another and as in public. This is the life that people used to live, but don't have to experience these days. So I'm hopeful in that regard that we don't have to be hide in secret. We don't have to be in the shadows. And it just kind of reminds me of a quote that I just learned about a few weeks ago, earlier this week. It was, they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And that's the kind of resilience that I feel that, we have been fighting for years. It's kind of heartbreaking to see that we're reliving this fight in the way that we once had to fight to get the rights that we have now. It's kind of heartbreaking for me at my age at 75, I will tell you that it has been a long road. I thought we had fought this fight, and I could rest on my laurels in my twilight years, my retirement years. But, you know, it seems as though we have to fight all over again. And the fight has, it continues, but I'm up for it. And a lot of folks my age are up for it too.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mary, kind of grounding us in this wider moment. Chastity, I want to move to some of the data that Sean walked us through. And we often hear in communities, all communities, we have a housing crisis in Massachusetts. And you've been a leading voice for housing stability for the trans and gender diverse community. The report shares that LGBTQ people have a home ownership rate 20% lower than their straight cisgender peers, that we heard from Sean. And stable housing gets even more complex and difficult for members of the trans community. Can you share some of the key issues and barriers facing trans individuals face in accessing secure housing?
Absolutely, thank you, Scott. I think it starts off with separating sexual orientation from gender identity. So we talked a lot about sexual orientation in this report, but when it comes to the trans community, it's gender identity. And so that's where a lot of discrimination comes in play, because people don't understand what they don't know, and they don't understand trans people. They don't understand non-binary people. So they see us coming to apply for housing, they automatically think, okay, this is gonna be an issue. We don't want this person in our house. We don't know if it's a man or a woman. They have all of these assumptions that they have. And then the non-discrimination laws that we do have here, it's hard to prove discrimination when it comes to housing. So when we were looking for this house for the Trans Emergency Fund, we saw over 65 properties in the span of 2 months. And some of the questions we were being asked was, oh, are they predators? Is this house gonna be for predators? Are they sex offenders? Like all of these questions that they wouldn't ask if we were lesbian or gay or bisexual. And so I think we have to see that and understand that and recognize that that is a key issue when it comes to trans people in housing, is that discrimination piece. But then also there's a financial component to it, right? Massachusetts is highly expensive for market rents, and the minimum wage don't add up. And so I think we need some of our public elected officials to work on that, getting that minimum wage up or getting that housing lower so then people can afford these certain things, right? And so until we can address the financial inequities within the trans community, we're gonna continue to have these housing issues. And I would like to know that 20% of homeowners in the LGBTQ community, how many of them are people of color? Because that breaks it down even more. And so we have to address the overt racism in Massachusetts. It's here, it's alive, it's well. And so until we address those issues, we're gonna continuously have these issues. And if I don't know where I'm sleeping tomorrow, I don't care about my health. That's not a priority to me. My priority is my next meal, where I'm gonna lay my head at night. And so we need to address these issues. There's a lack of funding for the trans community when it comes to housing. Between the ages of 26 and 62, there are little housing resources. Trans Emergency Fund only has 8 beds, and they serve the state. So they continuously have a waiting list. But yet the city and the state are not giving them the funding to be sustainable. They're still paying rent for a house instead of the city getting that house for them. And so we can have these conversations ongoing, we can have these panel discussions, but until we put troops to action, we're gonna continue to have these same rates when it comes to housing, especially within trans communities, especially within Black and brown trans communities.
Thank you, Chastity. I want to, I mentioned earlier that 25 cents on every dollar of charitable giving goes to the LGBTQ community and issues. That's 5 cents when we talk about the trans and gender diverse community. 5 cents of every $100 in charitable giving in this country nationally. Thank you, Chastity, for highlighting that. Cecil, you are relatively new to Massachusetts from North Carolina. And I'm wondering if you can share with us what brought you to Massachusetts and what have the last 6 months been like in Mass compared to North Carolina?
So I actually moved to Massachusetts following the results of the November 2024 election. I worked in retail, and I could not stay in North Carolina. I could not stay in the South. And it was very disheartening to have to leave my home, a place that I grew up, where all my family and my friends were, to migrate to a place where I felt I would be more accepted and included. And I feel like it's easy to forget for people here. It's easy, I work at NAGLY, and it's easy for my kids to forget that they are in such a different environment from the environment that I came from. I think we need to remember that Massachusetts is, while the laws are not perfect, they are far better than the laws in some of our other areas across the United States, especially where I'm from in the mid to deep South, as well as my friends that are from the deep South or even places like SoCal. Massachusetts has a very good and well-structured policy for things like transgender health care. In North Carolina, I was actually the last drop of young adults that was able to start hormone therapy before it was outlawed in the state. And that is something that has been very difficult for my friends and community back home and across the country, is struggling to access gender-inclusive health care. For me, coming to the North Shore area, it was like a night and day difference in terms of what people were willing to do for me and people that were willing to fight for me and with me. There is a lot of people who are very disheartened across the country and aren't willing to fight, and I have not noticed that here in Massachusetts. Everyone is very willing to stand up and put their feet down and say, you're not going to erase us. And that's one of the things that I've noticed most since moving to Massachusetts, is there is this idea that's so prevalent of, we are not wanted, we cannot be visible, we cannot be accepted. And here, there's that sort of thing, and it's inspired me as well with the current political landscape of, there's an old saying, if they come for me in the morning, they will come for you at night. And people here are living by that and choosing to stand up and fight back, as opposed to roll down and lie over.
Thank you, Cecil. You know, I want to follow up, Cecil. You are part of an age group that has one of the largest identification rates. We heard from Sean, I think over close to 24%, 18 to 24-year-olds. What are the, and let me pause with the question. There's many studies out there that say by 2040, 1 in 5 adult voters in our country will be part of the LGBTQ community. When you start to think about what that means for schools and youth-serving organizations and in a variety of institutions. Cecil, I'm wondering if you can share, just from your perspective, what are the issues LGBTQ young people face in schools and as young adults right now?
So that's a loaded question, and there are many things that I've noticed, both from my experience as a gay and transgender young adult in North Carolina, as well as my kids at NAGLY, what they're experiencing here in the North Shore area. And unfortunately, it is very similar. One of the big things that young adults face, and teenagers and LGBTQ plus children face, is mental health issues. Like Sean said, there is a higher risk of bullying, there's a higher risk of depression, of suicidality. There is, I believe the statistic is that there's somewhere close to 1 in 4 LGBTQ teenagers will seriously consider suicide. And that's something that's very close and personal to me and close and personal to my heart, as I've lost friends to suicide. I've lost friends to harassment and bullying, and that's something that we need to address as being a real problem with queer young people. It's something that's not often looked as being a real issue, especially where I come from, but it is. And people need to realize that mental health is just as important as some of our other forms of health care, and it's not easy to access. It's especially not easy for young people in living situations where they're maybe not supportive or their family is abusive to access mental health resources. And we need to work to make it more inclusive, especially in schools. I know a bunch of people that have been had issues with school mental health care providers in terms of not being accepted in their gender or sexual orientation. And that same thing goes for everything across schools of young people are not feeling supported or welcomed in their environments by their peers, by their teachers, or by their collective environments.
Thank you, Cecil. I want to stay on that theme of just access to healthcare. You lifted up behavioral health care support and mental health care support for young people. And Paul, I know you're joining us from what would be considered a more rural part of the state. And you shared with us in a prep conversation that you actually feel pretty positive about the health care that you're receiving. And I'm wondering if you can share, like, what are the key characteristics that make your healthcare experience positive, and that we should be thinking about for LGBTQ individuals, especially aging adults, in rural and suburban communities?
Well, my healthcare is somewhat unique. I'm HIV positive, and I receive my primary care and my specialized care around that. And in Falmouth, through the Cape Cod Healthcare Network, they have specialized clinics for that I attend regularly. I see my doctor, who is well versed around LGBT care, HIV care. So I have my primary care and my specialist is the same person. And they treat the whole person. So when we talk about behavioral health, they always ask, how is your health? How is your mental health? Are you feeling lonely? Are you feeling at any time suicidal? It's interesting that those are the questions that they ask, but they're asked on a it's been normalized. It's something that I think that it should be normalized in all healthcare, not just about your physical health. And mine being unique as well, because it's geriatric care as well. I'm a senior citizen, and there are lots of comorbidities that exist when you get older. It's not just about my HIV care. It's I have hypertension. There are other factors that, thank goodness I'm not one of them, but certainly obesity and diabetes. Those are regular aging kinds of health concerns and health issues that people are faced with, and it's one of the things that get addressed when I go to my clinic visits, particularly for the annual wellness visits. They normalize things in such a way. I still get tested for HPV. It's like I think it's the kind of care that should happen everywhere and for everyone. Shouldn't just be for the kind of specialized care that I feel that I'm getting. And it does happen across the Cape. I was introduced to this kind of care through the AIDS support group of Cape Cod. And they connected me, this was many years ago, and it has been, I'm very grateful for the kind of care that I get. But I'm keenly aware that there are inequities in the kind of care that folks have in other areas, particularly in more rural areas of the state and across the country. It just does not happen, and folks don't have the kind of access. They should be more accessible. There should be more primary care physicians who are embracing the LGBTQ community and the unique challenges that we have as individuals. And it's just, I know that it doesn't happen, but it should. And it should be a normalized thing for them to make these kinds of inquiries to give us the whole health that we need.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, I want to continue on with the question with you and Chastity. You had shared earlier, by identity of your generation, by being an LGBTQ person of color, that experiencing both the fight for civil rights as well as LGBTQ rights. And Chastity and Paul, are there resiliencies in Black queer people that you would highlight?
I would say, first of all, you looking at them. And and there's a few more in the audience too. But I think, you know, when doors are closed on us, we open new doors for ourselves. When we are pushed from the table, we create our own table. And so I think that has been instilled in us. I believe that, you know, I am walking and fighting on the shoulders of my ancestors, of Marsha P. Johnson, of Sylvia Rivera. And they didn't take no for an answer. They didn't care about racism, they didn't care about police, and that's how we feel in this new day and age, is that we're walking in that same line. Like, we're gonna push through, we're gonna fight through, we're gonna mobilize, we're gonna galvanize, and we're gonna continue to fight for what we know we deserve, what we require, and what's equally right as a human being. And so I think that lies within the Black resiliency when it comes to Black LGBTQ plus IA2S people.
Well, I would say in terms of resiliency, I saw it even, Mary mentioned it earlier, I was there at Stonewall, and there were lots of BIPOC people, teenagers, who were on the front lines, pushing back and creating the resistance that needed to happen that sparked the gay revolution. You know, it gets missed oftentimes, and you just mentioned, you know, Sylvia Rivera and you know, Miss Marsha P. Johnson. They were there and fighting the good fight. And I said this on many occasions. You know, we owed a huge debt of gratitude for our transgender community, who were really fighting the fight on the front line, both in Stonewall and beyond, on behalf of the rest of the community. You know, it was the transgender community that has been harassed more than all of us, has been hurt and killed more than all of us. You know, we talked about suicide rates, but we're not talking about murder rates. You know, I'm talking about the trans community has been taken the brunt for our community as a whole, and we should all be grateful for that. And grateful, in fact, that they're still standing, that they're still resilient, and that they were still here, and now in leadership roles. You know, I'm talking about, you know, Chastity, you're one of them. You know, I look around the room and I see, you know, many, you know, Adriana, Jordina, and, you know, Giselle Bird, who's here, is now the CEO of the Theater Offensive, and Gary Daffin here, who is the CEO of the Multicultural AIDS Coalition. I'm just saying that, you know, we have the resilience because we're now in leadership roles, and we can make a difference in setting policy and laws.
To go back off of what you just said, and we can't forget Justice Williams also in the audience. We were fighting for the entire community back in the day. And so right now, we are on the chopping block. And so we need lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals to really stand up and not be behind us, but on the side of us, helping us fight this fight, because we can't do it alone. Like, we're gonna try to do it alone if we got to, but we shouldn't have to. And so we need y'all to stand up.
Chastity cosign. So I could do this all day because it's a deep honor to sit with the five of you. I also want to make sure that there's time for questions from our audience. Before we go to the audience, I just want to ask one last question of Sean, and then we're going to get some assistance from our mic runners. So, you know, Sean, obviously, you and Mary and others have highlighted since January, the current administration has worked to radically restructure healthcare policy, funding, research. What will these efforts mean for LGBTQ equity in Massachusetts moving forward?
Yeah. I'd say they'll be pretty devastating. So, you know, when I first started seeing these policies coming in January, I thought, wow, we're going back to the 1980s. And I remember, I think a lot of folks in this room remember Senator Jesse Helms on the floor of the Senate criticizing the General Social Survey for adding a sexual orientation question in 1988, but also criticizing Gay Men's Health Crisis, where he used to work, for promoting homosexuality with federal money in its HIV prevention work. There's not a lot of difference between promoting homosexuality and advocating gender ideology, you know. We're hearing echoes of some of that. But I feel like in some ways we're really going back to the 1950s. Now, as Mary said, we don't have 50 states with sodomy laws. There's a lot of things that have changed since the 1950s, but our federal government is pretending that LGBTQ plus people don't exist. They're saying we're not going to collect data on LGBT people anymore. Don't mention LGBT disparities. Don't mention racial and ethnic disparities. They're threatening our ability to provide gender-affirming care. They're going after care for minors right now, but we're very concerned about our ability to provide care for adults. They're slashing HIV and STI prevention funding and care, cutting CDC by more than 40%, cutting NIH by 43% in the president's budget, terminating LGBT health research. Jordina, you mentioned millions of dollars. The New York Times said it was possibly $800 million in LGBT health research alone has been stopped. At Foundry, we've lost at least 15 grants, you know, 4 million in research. So, the same amount in HIV research. And then, you know, under the Obama and the Biden administrations, we prioritized promoting equality and safety for LGBT people around the world. And so we were supporting through U.S. Agency for International Development LGBT activists in Uganda, in South Africa, and Nigeria, in the former Soviet Union, in the majority Arab and Muslim countries, where it's especially dangerous to be openly LGBTQ. We've abandoned those people. You know, we've just cut them off, as well as, you know, people living with HIV. Their medication's just been cut off. So it's really devastating. And but like Mary said, our community, and like I said to Luke right before this, our community emerged in the crucible of oppression, and our community formed in resistance to government oppression, to cultural bigotry, and we'll have to do it again, you know?
Thank you, Sean. So we have, hey Justice, we have time for a few questions, and we're going to ask for assistance from my colleagues, Sam and Julia. And we'll go to the, oh, no, I was just going to say, you can model for us. Thank you, Julia.
Hi, thank you so much for all of your remarks. Cecil, you're behind the pole, but I see you kind of on the TV. My name is Aditi. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the Senior Director of Program and Strategy at the Boston Women's Fund, and I serve on the board at the Boston Alliance for LGBTQ Youth, and just so grateful for this panel. One of the things that is particularly front of mind for me and many of the organizations that BWF serves is just how intersectional this issue is as well. And Sean, one of the things that you mentioned in the data was that the demographics for LGBTQ folks is roughly the same as the demographics of Massachusetts in general, but we're also facing an immigration crisis for our immigrant communities. We're also facing a crisis for young people, cross-generational. And so I'm curious if some of you can speak to just the ways in which your work takes those things into account, or how we as folks maybe in more privileged positions, for example, I work in philanthropy, how can we step up and really support our communities across these intersections? I'm seeing the ways in which immigrant communities already sort of where being LGBTQ and as a child of immigrants, I experienced this, are already stigmatized, and now you've got this additional layers of fear that we're experiencing in this country. So I'm curious if you can speak to that. And really quickly before that, Cecil, I'm also from North Carolina, and I remember going to a therapist when I was in college and being like, hey, I'm really struggling with my sexuality. Can I talk about this? And she was like, I don't know what LGBTQ plus means. Can you tell me? And this was at North Carolina State University. So I'm right there with you. I also moved to Massachusetts, and we can talk about it.
Anyone want to?
I'll jump in.
Sure. Thank you, Mary.
I think it's a great question, and I will say just some big picture things about the immigration issue, which is You know, I am seeing in this nation a recognition of the power that people have, and including like direct resistance of like trying to protect people or divert ICE and other masked people from taking folks. And I think that that's extremely important. So that is cross-cutting. And we see it also playing out in the law, where the administration is insisting, testing. Can it just ignore due process? Ignore it. Ignore that right to have a hearing in front of a judge before you're snatched and removed. And people are upset about that. And that is, and this issue in particular on immigration, where this is coming to a head. I find those things, this is a horrible situation, but I find those kinds of things encouraging. And briefly in our work, I will say, you know, we all read Project 2025, we all had a sense of what was coming, but it's worse. Mm-hmm. And it's worse. Meaner and crueler, okay? And having said all of that, like day one, like as soon as that gender ideology order was issued on day one, literally we started getting calls from family members of people who are incarcerated in Bureau of Prisons facilities, federal facilities, who are worried about their loved ones because all the trans women were told they were going to men's prison. And we got papers together on a weekend and served them on a Sunday night and got an order saying, no, you cannot do this, okay? And I will tell you, it's mostly trans women of color in those prisons. And not only, but mostly. And we've had to bring successive cases as well. But again, this is an area where the rule of law is holding, and we recognized the immediate harm, you know, of like you move people, you take them off medications, and you put them in total danger of assault and sexual assault in these facilities. So that is one thing, like just knowing where there's going to be extremely serious harm. Immigration is one, you know, a prison population is another. The other thing I wanted to say is the military. I know not everybody's a fan of the military. I understand there's critiques of the military. It is a sort of, in its own way, like a badge of belonging, that you are there to serve your nation and that you are qualified to do so. You are inherently worthy of doing so. And that is another area where immediately, they wanted to fire people right away, discharge them right away. Just like, it's a really big operation, so you can't do anything overnight. So they wanted 30 days. No. Now, we have been in court on that one as well and did obtain temporary restraining orders, and then preliminary injunctions to stop this. Some of you probably heard the Supreme Court stepped in another case. That was not our case. In our case, we went to trial. We brought forward witnesses, including a bunch of former service secretaries who were 1,000% on our side, and said there was no military-based reason, nothing that would be gained from discharging trans service members simply because they're trans. There's no reason for it. These people have stellar records, and you're reading the papers, you see that. And our judge concluded, yeah, this is about animus. It's not about policy. So I'm just going to say to you that we're doing work in education and healthcare on lots of things, but I want to say I don't count on the courts for everything, but I think we've got to insist that legal principles be followed. And I want to say, lawyer as I am, I think it's extremely important that people are on the streets. I think we have so much power to speak about what kind of nation we expect and the norms we expect and the justice that we expect across the board. And you know, you can argue that there's a lot of movements that have been fueled by that and that people have led the courts and led society and brought people to our side for justice for all.
I'll just say something about the immigration issue, but I also want to acknowledge that Representative Sam Montano has been with us for a period of time here, and we're really grateful to have you here. And great work on Beacon Hill, advocating for our communities. Also is the co-chair of the LGBT Aging Commission for the state, so thank you. So I just wanted to say that in terms of immigrants, people have different, due to intersectional identity, people have different layers of vulnerability. And I think it's important to think about immigrants and their vulnerability to different kinds of health disparities. So in particular, sexual health, HIV and STI screenings. You know, the STI rates in Massachusetts have been going up a lot over the last decade, quarter century, anywhere from 3 times to 10-fold increase for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. We also saw an increase of about 20% in new HIV diagnoses from, I think, 22 to 23. So it's a really important issue, and a lot of immigrants who are LGBTQ are getting their health care. Some are coming to Fenway Health, but a lot of them are going to East Boston Health Center, to Common Square. And so it's really important that providers in those venues be trained in how to provide LGBTQ affirming care to people who may be not out to their siblings. They may be sharing an apartment with friends from their hometown or family members, and they might not be out to them. And the research shows that people who are not out to their providers as an LGBTQ person are less likely to be told, hey, you should consider taking doxypep after a sexual encounter to reduce your risk of chlamydia or syphilis, or you should get an HIV screening on a periodic basis, or an HPV screening, like you mentioned, Paul. So anyway, so Fenway Health does training of healthcare providers around the country, and we absolutely have partnered with groups that work with immigrant populations in particular to ensure that we're doing linguistically competent and culturally competent trainings for providers of immigrant populations.
Thank you so much. This has been a really excellent panel. My name is Hamad, he, they. I'm trying to open a wellness center and a sauna for the LGBTQ plus community, but I wanted to share an anecdote and then ask a question. My nephew moved to Boston on January 20th this year, the day that President Trump was elected. He's transgender, he moved from Alabama. He wanted to come to Boston and access education and healthcare. And it's been really hard. It's been a really hard transition. He feels quite lonely and depressed at times, although the access is there. He feels that Boston is a difficult city to make friends, meet people, and just to find connection. And so I'm wondering what we should do as a state, as a community, as a city to get ready for the influx of people who are coming here, people like you, Cecil, and my nephew, and what we can do individually and as a community.
Thank you, Ahmad. Anybody want to?
So one of the things that I've found is through my work at NAGLI is having these groups of organizations and communities centered and catered to LGBTQ people, have them be ready and have them increase the funding for these organizations, increase the funding for these places of community, because it is hard. It's hard to relocate. It's hard to leave behind everything you know, even if it is for the best. And having a place that provides a sense of community and togetherness, especially for other LGBTQ individuals, is something that's really important. And with the funding that's being cut from all of these organizations, government funding, organizational funding, and et cetera, it's very important that we have places that transplants and the queer community as a whole can come together.
I just want to touch on something that we haven't talked enough about, and this has to do with our transgender community and beyond. We need to be mindful of who we are voting in as our elected officials. Mary talked about it. We have the power as individuals, but oftentimes we have an ambivalent attitude about voting sometimes, particularly in non-presidential years of voting. We're talking about, electing people to your school board, to your town management, it doesn't have to be a state legislator, I'm talking about local legislators. And it's important that we uplift and support LGBTQ folks who are willing and want to step up and become an elected official and work on behalf of the public. But they don't get the backing or the support they really need. And we as community, as a unified community, can make that happen. So we have to really be mindful. I'm not just talking about folks of my age. We vote all the time. Seniors are the ones, we're the cohort, if you will, that get to the polls and vote on non-important elections, but I can tell you it's important that younger people do this. Young people, I'm talking about, folks who are just coming to the state now, who have the right to vote, utilize it. Understand who is in office, who's running for office, and mount a movement around that particular individual so that they can get in office and help us, help our community and help support our initiatives. So I'm just saying, voting is not, it's a right and not a privilege, and we're all afforded that right. So that's the easiest thing that I could say we can do is to vote.
Well, I think we have Congressman Keating, who's going to be retiring, maybe run for his seat down.
And Paul,
We have time for one more question. Can we go to Justice up in the front? Thank you, Sam.
Greetings. I am Coach Justice. I'm just listening to, first and foremost, I'm grateful for all of the leaders in this space, right? Leadership is important. My question is coming from a space of, when I think about a shared vision of what liberation can be for us all, right? And I feel like my shared vision incorporates everyone in this room. I don't think of my identity as a specialty. I think of how I am meeting folks at the intersections of who I am and who we are. Does that make sense? Right? So we're asking questions of, how are we moving in these next 4 years? Right? The erasure of non-binary folks, targeting Black trans women, right? I feel like if we were to fix things, and people say this, it's echoes. We hear these echoes, right? From the panel. Any space that we're in where we're talking about liberation, if we fix things for the most marginalized, we all privilege in that space, right? The only way we're going to get there is through our collective power, right? And history is important, as we hear from the panel, right? Because what Trump is doing is bringing us back in time to a place where we were distant from each other. What makes it hard here is that we're tighter niched. We're more connected, right? We see each other. My question for the panelists, specifically for the Black trans woman on the panel, how are we supporting you as a whole collective to feel elevated, liberated, and free in this space on this land?
Thank you.
Ooh.
I want you to know.
Right. In order to feel, I'm taking it in. I'm really taking that in. But in order to feel truly supported and uplifted, it's unity. And that's something that I don't feel that we have in Boston and in Massachusetts. Because unity is not accusatory. Unity is not trying to who can do it better. Unity is not about who looks better. Unity is not about which program can get the most money. Unity is supposed to be about really uplifting and coming together as a whole community. But that ain't easy. And so do I feel completely supported in Boston and Massachusetts? Absolutely not. But do I feel like we can get there to where I feel I can have the support that's needed in order to continue to do this work, in order to continue to be marginalized, in order to continue to be overlooked? Is that we have to come together. And that means recognizing your unconscious biases and sometimes conscious biases when it comes to different people that might not look like you, that might not have the same access as you, or that might not have the same everything as you. And so when we talk about unity and uplifting Black trans women, we don't feel uplifted until we can see that you are truly there for us. And being truly there for us is being there for us not only in the good times when it's Pride season and it's time to celebrate and put on all your colors. No, we need you to be there in February, in November, when it's cold outside and we're trying to fight, when we got people calling us saying they was just abused or they was just beaten or their family member just kicked them out. We need you then. Mm-hmm. And only then will I feel supported. And we ain't there yet.
Amen.
Justice, thank you for that question, that spotlight. Chastity, Cecil, Sean, Paul, Mary. I knew this was going to be ambitious in our 90 minutes together. And I just want to, as we wrap, I want to say deep gratitude and deep appreciation for joining us. Can we give a round of applause?
Thank you, you too. It was so nice to meet you too. I love your nails, by the way. I was looking at them the whole time, like they're so pretty.
I had no idea.
And as we wrap up, just a couple of notes. You know, justice and chastity. I want to make sure we pick up that conversation. And I know I don't want to speak for the room, but I feel like I can safely offer for the room that we want to figure out how to do that together. As we wrap up, I just want to give one more thank you to Sean for your leadership on this report and to Fenway for your leadership in the community. I want to thank the Boston Foundation's phenomenal events team for your work in making sure that we're all taken care of, comfortable. I want to thank all of you who've joined us in person and online for this important conversation. And I invite, as we wrap up, I invite two things. One is pick up a copy of the report on the way out. It's also online. And share the report. Share the link. Continue the conversation of the themes around both resiliency, specifically around needs and action. And I also invite folks to join us in celebration. And on June 12th, the Equality Fund will celebrate out at the Pride, LGBTQ senior housing from 4 to 6. And we are going to celebrate our sophisticated, our talented, our savvy nonprofit ecosystem that is doing this work every day for LGBTQ equity on multiple levels across Greater Boston. So invite to follow, but mark your calendars, June 12th. And with that, final thank you, and have a great day.